Today, I've been asked to talk about the continent of Africa. And many of you will be aware that there has been no shortage of people who have spoken about Africa. But the issue of governance in Africa is an evergreen subject. And those who are familiar with history will remember the memorable speech of the Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. He was as enthusiastic as he was eloquent. He was able to identify in his famous book, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, that if Africa was not united, the neocolonial project would be alive and well, and all the gains that had been achieved would be lost. But earlier than that, the Osagyefo assembled 32 African leaders in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And if you read his speech on that day, on the 24th day of March 1963, the sense of urgency, he appealed to the leaders present at that forum. He cajoled them, unite now. Let us not live here without one Africa, where there is no restriction of borders, where there are no visas, where we have one currency. Let us not live here without one army. Let us not live here without our unity. But they listened to him not. What we ended up with was a diluted version of what the Osagyefo wanted in the name of the Organization of African Unity, which for a long time was only famous as an annual jamboree of dictators and ne'er-do-wellers. I remember so very vividly that when we attained independence, one of the things that we said we must do is to exorcise the ghost of colonialism, to demonstrate that we had become of age, to demonstrate that we could do our things. And we started in all sectors of the economy talking about Africanization. We were clear in our minds that we were not children of a lesser God. So we started with our agriculture. And we said that Africa must feed herself, that Africa must not import food from Europe and America, that here in West Africa, when you produce cocoa, you must not export raw cocoa, you must add value. That you lovers of jollof rice must consume jollof rice that is produced here in Ghana. So we went into agriculture. We devoted a good percentage of our gross domestic product into agriculture. But as I speak to you now, African agriculture is in a sorry state. Ali Mazrui is right. Africa produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. And if it was not agriculture, we went into the transportation industry. Every African country had an airline. As I speak to you today, they have all been consigned into the Museum of History. Even our own Kenyan Airways is about to collapse, is in a state of animated suspension. We lost it out. We said we wanted our railways, and we threw out our colonizers. Today our railway lines have died. The little bits of them that remain and we are trying to rehabilitate are incapable of rehabilitation. We lost our railways. We brought in our post office and we said we want to deliver our mail, not the royal mail. And we created them today. None of us is comfortable with our own post offices. We rely on FedEx and DHL and UPS. We have lost faith in our things. Today, many young Africans are running away. Not so long ago, about 4 weeks to be exact, 300 young Africans drowned in the Mediterranean Sea in Lampedusa because they were running away from Africa. Not so long ago, about 3 weeks to be exact, another group of young Africans drowned next to the island of Malta because they were running away from Africa. When you look at Africa today, whether you are looking at Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria, or indeed any country in Africa, our richest men and women are the men and women who occupy public office. We live in a continent where we celebrate thieves and vilify good men and women. That is the tragedy of Africa. While every other continent in the recent past has moved in the right direction, Africa still remains, in the words of Tony Blair, as the scar in the conscience of humanity. We live in a continent today where, as the young man has said, our young women, upon attaining puberty, cannot afford sanitary pads. But our public servants have iPads which they do not know how to use. We live in a continent today where our leaders who preside over our health sectors have no faith in the health sector. When they are sick and their families are sick, they run away to seek treatment in Germany, in France, in the United Kingdom, in South Africa and India. Even our health ministers don't have faith in our health departments. We live in a country and countries today where the political leadership have no faith in the education sector. They bring unto us what they call free primary education or universal primary education, but they can never dare take their children to those schools. We live in countries where we claim that agriculture is the backbone of our societies, but we do not use technology to produce crops. Africans are dying younger than they were dying 50 years ago. We live in a country where Africans will energetically seek to amend the Statute of Rome while there is war in Mali, while there is war in Mauritania, while there is no peace in Somalia, while there is no rest in Eritrea. Africa is a tragic continent. And I want to submit to you that corruption is the source of all these. For some reason, a reason that I do not understand, Africans still engage in primitive accumulation. Many Africans, particularly those in public service, will never rest until they have homes in different capitals in the world which they'll never live in. They have cars which they'll never drive. They have beds of gold which they never sleep on because they have no sleep anyway. They buy food which they cannot eat because they long lost their appetites. We live in sad times. The children of darkness, who are the perpetrators of corruption, have one advantage over the children of light. They are well organized. They are prepared to kill. They are prepared to do anything on earth to ensure that their ill-gotten wealth is retained and protected.
But Chinua Achebe was right. The tragedy of Africa is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. The men and women that we entrust with leadership are men and women who are ill-suited for leadership. It is a tragedy that is periodically visited upon us. I've said it before, that how can Africa periodically and repeatedly allow hyenas to take care of goats? It is the nature of hyenas to consume goats. And when our leaders do that, we are surprised. I want to submit to you that we have been too nice to each other for too long. And the time has come that we Africans must call things by their proper name. It is only when we do so that Africa will begin to recognize and to realize that we are moving in the wrong direction. We'll not address our economies if we don't trade in Africa. African trade is not more than 40%. There is shortage of maize in Zimbabwe as I speak, but there is surplus of maize in Uganda as I speak. Ugandan are importing milk from Switzerland, and yet there is excess milk in Kenya and in Uganda. In this very hotel, last evening, I told a friend of mine at the reception that when you look very keenly, the time zones of New York are indicated. The time zones of Sydney, Australia are indicated. The time zones of Dubai is indicated. The time zone of Johannesburg is indicated. I would have thought that they indicated the time zones of Nairobi, Kenya, of Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and of Dakar in Senegal, but no, our default natural inclination is to the colonizers. Even in matters of time, we still look to them. The neo-colonial project is alive and well. The neo-colonial project is being fed by our docility and our ignorance. The neo-colonial project is becoming a monster that is going to consume us. You know, Africa has suffered. Not so long ago, from a historical standpoint, Africans were taken out of this continent. Over half the population of Africa was taken out of this continent. You only have to go to the point of no return in Dakar, Senegal, to appreciate man's inhumanity to man. Africans who are taken to Europe and America to fuel the engine of the emerging agrarian industry in Europe and America.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This summit takes place against the background of a world of growing globalization. It is therefore most imperative that we get to know one another even better than before in order to fully appreciate the various circumstances under which we live. Africans and African Americans need each other. There are well-known historical and sentimental reasons why Africans and African Americans must cooperate. These must form a basis for strengthening and deepening linkages between us of a more substantial nature.